This lesson is for XEI 301. In this particular lesson, we're going to be evaluating expressions. Our focus skill for today is to substitute whole numbers for unknown quantities to evaluate expressions. So we're going to begin here with a review skill. So we've already worked on problems like this where we read a little bit of a word problem here, and then it asks us to write an expression that models the word problem. So here it says Stacy has played soccer for the past 4 years of high school. She counted out her team's wins, losses, and ties. The team won W games, lost L games, and tied T games. Write an expression for how many games her team has played in 4 years. So when it says write an expression for how many games they have played in 4 years, they're really asking for the total. So if we want to express the total number of games that she's played, that would include all of the games that they've won, lost, and tied. So we'd write that as W, because that represents the number of games that they've won, plus the number of games that they have lost, L, plus the number of games that they have tied, T. This is the expression that they're looking for, and that's actually all we have to do in this particular problem. Okay, next up we have these focus and isolation questions. So these are testing our focus skill. We're asked to substitute these quantities here into this expression. So it says evaluate 3x minus 2y when x is equal to 4 and y is equal to negative 6. So we want to know what this is equivalent to if we were able to plug these values in to this particular expression. So what we have to be careful about is that we are using the right operations, but also that we're plugging in the right number for the particular variable. So here I would write this as 3 times 4 minus 2 times negative 6. Now I use parentheses, and I do that because sometimes when I write 3 times 4, that could look like 34 without the little expression here for multiplication. So I like to write it in parentheses a lot. And I think it's a good habit for you guys to get into also because it's more advanced. It's like algebra as opposed to just writing it, with the type of math that you did in junior high and that kind of thing. Now here, this negative 2 times negative 6, it's also helpful to put these in parentheses because then you're seeing you have this entire number multiplied by the negative 2 here. So like I said, it's just a little bit better to have the parentheses in there. Okay, so if we evaluate, we have 3 times 4, which is 12. Negative 2 times negative 6 gives me a positive 12. So I always have to remember a double negative here gives me a positive. So now I'm going to simplify 12 plus 12, and that gives me 24. So the answer here is simply 24. Now in number 3, we have a little bit more difficult of an expression here because I've got more variables involved. So again, you want to be just careful that you're substituting in the correct variables. So we have a equaling negative 8. So I'm going to substitute negative 8 here and write that as 2 times negative 8, then plus, I'm going to add the b value, which is 6, so plus 6. We're going to divide that number by c plus d. C is given to me, and that's equal to 2. And we're also told that 22 is equal to d, so we have 2 plus 22 in the denominator. So now we're just going to simplify this using order of operations. Now in order of operations, we need to multiply before we can add. So we're going to multiply 2 times negative 8 first. So we get negative 16, then plus 6. And then in the denominator, you can either rewrite this one more time, or you can just simplify the denominator too. So you could have written 24 in the denominator because 2 plus 22 is 24. And for negative 16 plus 6, we get negative 10. Now, what we worked on before in our previous lesson in NCP 302, we've been reducing fractions, right? So you always want to make sure that you can reduce this fraction. So basically, after I go through and I plug in these values, I evaluate the top, I evaluate the bottom, I get the number negative 10 over 24. And I don't want to circle this as my final answer unless I'm sure it's in lowest terms. So I'm going to find the GCF between those two numbers. GCF here is 2. So I divide the top by by 2 and I get negative 5. I divide the bottom by 2 and I get 12. So this would be my final answer here when I evaluate this beginning expression. Okay, next up in number 4, now we're going to substitute in a negative value. This is a little bit trickier than what we've done before because we have to substitute in a negative value. So here when it says to evaluate this expression, anywhere we see the x, we're going to substitute in negative 2. So now I have negative 2 squared. So I'm going to write that as negative 2 to the second power minus 3 times negative 2 plus 5. Now you have to be very, very careful when you try to plug this into your calculator. When you type in negative 2 and you square it and you type it in like that, your calculator will tell you the answer is negative 4. However, we know that this number here is negative 2 times negative 2, right? If I square a negative 2, that means I'm making that and I'm multiplying that twice. So this becomes positive 4 because we have a negative times a negative. What we need to make sure we do in our calculator is actually enter this as parentheses negative 2 squared. Then our calculator will tell us the correct answer of 4. What we're doing wrong is we're inputting this into our calculator incorrectly if we just write negative 2 and type that in and then try to square that number. Your calculator thinks that this is supposed to be negative 2 times 2, which you don't see the repeated negative here. So that's why it tells you the answer is negative 4. So please make sure that whenever you see a quantity and you're squaring that quantity and it happens to be negative, that you have to put it in parentheses. Okay? Because there is a big difference between that and our calculators. Okay, so anyhow, we get positive 4 here for the 4. Then I'm supposed to take this number here. Now, don't subtract this yet. What you want to do is actually simplify negative 3 times negative 2. Now, negative 3 times negative 2 is actually a positive 6. So we're actually going to be adding 4 plus 6 here. Then I'm going to bring down this plus 5. So now I'm going to do one more step in my calculator where I take 4 plus 6 plus 5. So I should get 10 plus 5, which is 15. And that would be my final answer here. Okay? So again, these can be tricky. The concept isn't hard to just plug that number into here and here. But to get this final answer, sometimes it is tricky when you have those negatives there. So you got to be really careful when you're entering stuff in your calculator. Okay, I'd like you guys to pause right now, and you guys are going to try number 5. Make sure you do this problem because we are going to be checking this in when you check in your notes. Notice that there is a negative value here also for the 3, so it's a negative 3. So please make sure that you're being careful here when you're inputting everything into your calculator. Okay, next up we have our focus and context questions, our level 3 questions. So these are going to be similar to level 2, except now they're going to be in context to possibly a word problem or other mathematical applications. So here it says the expression 3a plus 2b plus c gives the total score for a basketball team that makes A 3-point field goals, B 2-point field goals, and C free throws. How many points would a team score if they make 4 3-point field goals, 9 2-point field goals, and 5 free throws? Now, you of course could do this if you played basketball before and you know how the points work in a basketball game. You'd be able to easily come up with this answer. But what we want to do is really focus on the fact that we're trying to use our skills here in mathematical ways. So remember, we're told that A is equal to 4 here, right? It says that A represents the number of 3-point field goals, and since they have scored 4 3-point field goals, we know A is equal to 4. We also know that 9, the number of 2-point field goals, is equal to B. So B, because B represents 2-point field goals here. And then we have C, which is the free throws, is equal to 5. So C is equal to 5. So I know that this would be a problem that you could do, just by understanding how a basketball game works, but let's focus on using our new skills. So we're going to plug in A is equal to 4. So we have 3 times 4 plus 2 times 9 plus 5, because we're going to use this expression here to figure out the total score for the basketball team. Okay? And then we just go ahead and evaluate this. 3 times 4 is 12. Plus 2 times 9 gives me 18, plus 5. So 12 plus 18 is 30, plus 5 gives me 35. So they scored 35 points. So we want to make sure that we're showing work. I want to see this work here, as well as this line of work, and then your final answer with units, okay, since this is a word problem. Now in problem 7, this is a equation for a line that you're given. So we're told that the equation of a line is y equals negative 3x plus 6. Now, they define stuff for you where they say negative 3 is the slope and 6 is the y-intercept. But really, this information isn't all that important to the question, because what they're asking you to do is fill in this particular table. Now, they're giving you the x values. So we have x equals negative 3, negative 2, and negative 1. We have 3 different x values, and we're supposed to come up with the y value here. So I'm going to plug this number in as the x. So I begin this problem by calculating y equals negative 3 times that value, if I plug it in, is negative 3, right? So I'm substituting in this negative 3 for the x here, right there. Then I write plus 6. So when I calculate this, I have negative 3 times negative 3. It gives me a positive 9 plus 6, and I end up with y equaling 15. So my first line here to fill out this table is the point negative 3, 15. So this is 15 here again by plugging in negative 3 for the x. Now you may have already done something similar to this before in a math class, but we're just practicing it one more time, and some of you might not have seen it ever, so it's a good thing that we're doing it now. Okay, now the next question, we're going to plug in -2 and do that same thing all over again. So now when I plug in -2, I should have y equals -3 times -2 plus 6. Again, because I'm plugging in -2 for the x here. So now I evaluate this. I have y equals -3 times -2 gives me a positive 6. 6 plus 6 gives me 12. So I have y equals 12. Last up, you're going to plug in -1 in for here. I would like you guys to try this one on your own. So make sure you're doing that because we will check that problem here and make sure you're doing it with accuracy. Okay, in number 8 it says that T-Mobile charges $42 a month plus 7 cents per text message. In the month of February, Sarah sends 58 text messages. The expression 42 plus 0.07 T, where T is the number of text messages that you send, represents the monthly phone bill. Using this expression, the question is, how much does Sarah owe T-Mobile for the month of February? So I know this kind of can sound a little bit confusing because there's so many words in this, but really what you're asked to do here is take a look at the total monthly bill. Well, 42 plus 0.07 T represents how much money she needs to pay. So you're going to start with this. And then you're going to think to yourself that T here represents the number of texts that she sends. And they tell you that she sends 58 texts. So all you need to do here is actually plug in 58 and then evaluate this. So we have 42 plus 0.07 times 58. So I end up with 42 plus, and if I type this into my calculator, I get $4.06, so 4.06. Now if I add that total together here, I end up with $46.06. So this is how much she owes to T-Mobile. So Sarah owes $46.06 to T-Mobile. So sometimes they look tough, but they don't end up being that difficult. Now in number 9, this is another question where instead of giving you kind of a word problem, they're giving you more of mathematical background here. So they're telling you that there's a formula here to find the discriminant of a quadratic equation. Okay, we don't really need to know much about what a discriminant or a quadratic equation is, other than here is that formula. Then it asks us to find the discriminant when a is equal to 3, b is equal to -2, and c is equal to -3. So remember, this is the expression that gives you the discriminant. All you're going to do is plug these values into this expression. So again, it's just an application of what you've been working on so far. So if I look at b squared minus 4ac, I'm going to plug in for the b value here a -2. So I take -2, and I have to remember that I'm putting that in parentheses here, and I'm squaring that. Because if I write this as -2 squared, I probably won't remember to put that in my calculator correctly. So please make sure you're using parentheses. So we have -2 squared, and then minus 4, right? Minus 4 times a. The a value here is 3, so I'm going to put that 3 here next to that. And then the c value here is -3. So let's talk about how you would put this into your calculator. The first thing you want to do is evaluate -2 squared. Now some of you guys will know what that is right away, but it's really -2 times -2. So again, make sure you're putting that into your calculator like this, because otherwise it'll give you the wrong answer. We should get a positive 4 here. Now for the next part, I'm going to stick this in my calculator separately, and I'm going to put that all in at one time. So I have -4 times 3 times -3. That's what I stick into my calculator all at once. I should get a positive number from this because I see I have a double negative. So make sure that your calculator output is being positive here, because if it's not, then you probably plug something in incorrectly, and you want to make sure you get that clarified with me so you can ask a question about that. But always make sure that you realize before you even type it into your calculator whether or not your calculator should be giving you, a positive or negative. So in this case, it should be positive. So when we type that in, we should get a positive 36. So what we're going to add to 4, a positive 36, that gives me 40. So even though the question here has a lot of words that we're not familiar with, we can still follow the directions, and based off of the formula they give us, just plug in our values. So I would like you guys to try number 10 here, the you try question. It's kind of similar to number 9, so go ahead and evaluate that. Just double check with the negatives, and then when you get this checked in with me, we'll make sure we go over this to make sure that you simplify that correctly. Okay, last up, we have an extension skill here. Now, this extension skill is used on the ACT a lot. That's something you take your junior year, and it's kind of a big deal because it's a score that gets you into colleges. So these questions here are seen a lot on the ACT, so I want to go over these so that when you see something like this, you don't get really confused. So here we've got this crazy notation. It says given that, and then they've got these little brackets here, x, y, z, is equal to 4x minus 2y plus 2z, find the value of, again, those brackets show up with 2, 1, 5 in the middle. So I'm just reading out loud here. This is an example of an evaluation problem, just like what we've been working on so far. In this case, when you see the notation of those brackets, you want to evaluate your expression by just substituting in the values 2, 1, and 5. So see how they have x, y, z in that order? This number here represents x, then y, then z. Okay, so they're just using this funky little notation to kind of throw you off, but then that's kind of what the ACT does. It tries to challenge you a little bit. So we're just going to use those numbers and plug them right into our expression. So we take 4 and we're going to multiply that by 2. We take our negative 2 here, and we're going to multiply that by the y value, which is 1. Then we're going to add 2 times z. Z is this value 5. So now we're just going to evaluate this. We have 4 times 2, which is 8, minus 2 times 1, which is negative 2. 2 times 5 gives me a positive 10. Now in my calculator, I can stick all this in at once. 8 minus 2 gives me 6, plus 10 is 16. So even though it started off being kind of a weird question, it's not too bad once we realized what we're supposed to do. Okay, we're going to finish off the lesson here with number 12, and then you're going to try number 13 on your own. So number 12 is similar to the last question that we just worked on, where they give us this weird notation here. So they have this weird symbol. But basically, they define what that symbol is. They give us an expression, a squared minus 2b. So they have a with the symbol b means that you're supposed to take a squared minus 2b. So here when they say evaluate 5 next to the symbol with a negative 5, so 5 with that symbol and then negative 5, what it's telling you is that the a value is 5, our b value is negative 5. So we're going to evaluate a squared minus 2b using 5 and negative 5. So I'm going to take 5 and substitute that in for the a value here. So I have 5 squared minus 2 times b. Now for 2 times b, this b value here needs to be replaced with the negative 5 here. So I'm going to replace that with a negative 5, and now I'm going to evaluate. 5 squared gives me 25. Then I notice I have this double negative here, negative 2 times negative 5. That's the same as thinking of a minus 2 times a negative 5. If you evaluate this first, you'd still get negative 10, and the minus negative 10 turns to positive. So sometimes students will ask me, is it minus 2 times negative 5, or is it negative 2 times negative 5? And the answer is yes, it's both, okay? So we've got negative 2 times negative 5, which gives me a positive 10. So 25 plus 10 gives me 35. So this question here is something you're going to try on your own. It gives you the weird symbol, but now that you know how to do these problems, these shouldn't look so hard. All right, that's the end of the lesson. Go ahead and get these checked in once you get all of the you try problems finished. Nice job, and get to work on your skill sheets.